Welcome everyone to the Test Choice YouTube channel. Mark, this is one of our many series, but this is one that I think people don't talk about a lot of. There's been some interesting changes in the news about this, and as with anything, there are huge opportunities. So we're going to talk about commercial to resi developments. Where do we start? I mean, okay, what are the key differences? So, okay, I've done a few buy-to-let, I've done a few flips. I want to do a commercial to resi. What should I get my head around first? What things do I need to really learn before I even start viewing or offering?
Yeah, I would say one of the first things you've got to get your head around is values. I think values is super important. You value a commercial property differently to a residential property, and then also, all about sort of, I think when you're looking at commercial properties, in particular, it's all about how you can either change the use class of the property, or you can extend. So obviously there are some projects where there's some buildings that are easier to change the use class, and also there's some buildings that are naturally in parts of the street scene or in parts of the city or a town that are in locations that you're able to build maybe higher or extend at the back. So there's a few things that you should sort of get your head around in terms of what you should be looking for. How are you going to value the property? So do you know how to value a commercial rental and how much the commercial property is worth? And then also the values obviously work similar to residential, the residential value of that area. So if you convert it into resi, what does that look like? How many units can you get there? What's the GDV, potential GDV? I think also you've got to have very good planning advice. You've got to have a good architect as well. Always have a good architect. And planning advice, crucial. You need to be very comfortable in sort of calling a planning consultant, getting their advice. Someone hopefully quite local to the area, or that is has a good experience maybe with the council. That's super critical because unlike resi, you are applying to. It's critical that really you're going to be converting it into residential, and if you don't get that, then that's going to significantly devalue the asset. So that's when it can get quite risky. Also, another aspect, I guess, is mortgages as well. You need to be sure that you've got a good mortgage broker that is comfortable doing a commercial mortgage broker. I wouldn't be using your standard buy-to-let mortgage broker that is comfortable doing those sorts of things. I would have someone that's in the commercial world and that he understands all the products that are on the market, and he knows all the possible exits. Because if you start going into things like bridging and development finance, you start incurring quite big costs on the back end. So you have an interest rate which is quite significant. And that leads back to the planning point, in the fact that if you can't get planning to change, you can end up in a very sticky situation, and that's where it can become quite risky, because you need to just be careful about all those factors. But with every risk, there's a lot of rewards.
And I think, just listening to that, just comparing it to my thought process for buying a buy-to-let, which is pretty much nothing, because they always work and they are very straightforward. There's a lot to think about. It's not as easy, I say it's easy, it's not, but it's not as straightforward as buying a buy-to-let or a flip or, maybe a lease extension or something like that. There is a lot more to think about. And of course, there's risk with planning, which is why some people buy subject to planning or options. But just to warn people, it's not straightforward, is it? No. Compared to buy-to-lets. No. It's not just come in, rip it apart, do it. When it comes to commercial to resi, obviously we're in lockdown, whatever you want to call it right now. The high street is dying or is dead. I think it's been dying before Corona. Maybe where do you see some of the opportunities now? And I guess also combined with what Boris has kind of maybe said, some new rules, where should we be looking?
Yeah, so I personally think, and where I am actually actively looking to invest at the moment, and for the foreseeable, for the next year or two, I think, maybe even longer, I think there's going to be some real opportunities, as you said, in high street locations. So Boris has made quite a few changes. To touch on a few, for example, takeaways recently have become, if they're under a certain size, you can convert them to residential. So if you're looking at a block
Under
permitted development, that's very
Okay.
important, yeah. So if you're looking at a block that's maybe a shop and uppers, you know, there's already PD regulations in that you can convert the first floor into residential. If it's then a takeaway on the ground floor, you've got further options to flex your muscles in terms of changing that into residential. So you can. So the other factor with commercial property is that actually you can buy square footage a lot cheaper, because commercial property is generally, in terms of the rental, in terms of the yield, it's generally a lot lower. So the real sweet spot is where you can buy something for a chip shop for maybe 100,000, 120,000, because it's on a neglected high street. But then you actually look at the back and you've got tons of space to extend. You've got 2 floors that you could probably get 2 flats up there. One of them potentially under PD, maybe both of them. The ground floor could become, resi as well. And then you start looking to the GDV values and you start thinking, well, actually, yeah, this is 100 grand at the moment, but it might be worth 350, 400, 500 as 3 flats.
And with the PD for that,
yeah.
How does it work? Is it automatically granted? Do you have to apply? Do you have to wait 56 days? How does it work?
Yeah, so under PD, generally the rule is that if it's under PD, you technically don't need to apply. But that being said, it's always best to go through the process of getting a certificate of lawfulness, which essentially means that your development is lawful. So at the end
before you do it, or
before you do it, you know, it's generally good practice. Go to the council, say, I want to convert this into PD. I want to convert this into resi. Under permitted development, I believe it's lawful. They'll come back and say, yes, Mark, it's lawful. I think it's still a 2-month deadline, but you have it in paper. The good factor with PD also, which is a very good factor, is that the national space standards don't apply. So it's critical.
Okay.
That's really critical. So when you see these office blocks that people have been converting,
and they complain about them,
and they make them really small. I've done a few schemes, not too small, but I've done a few schemes where we've done them. You know, we've had 1-bed studios that are 25 square meters in London. That is acceptable because the building is under PD and the national space standards don't apply. So that is why you can get quite a few developers making serious deals, make a lot of money from converting, for example, office to resi. So that's also a really.
I suppose with that, what you hear is a lot of complaints and things in the media where people are, look at these shoe boxes, look at this because of that. So I guess something to people watching is that be moral with it, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Be ethical. Like.
And actually, you've got to question: is it going to sell at the back end?
Well, yeah, because who's going to buy a shoebox?
Because if your deal, that's a massive thing though. If it doesn't sell, then does the deal really stack at that point? Yes, you can probably get a big value, but you've got to have those exits there. Because if you design something that can't sell, then you.
I mean, commercial to res is even, well, I guess there's some popular news. John Lewis is now becoming a house developer, builder.
Yeah.
And they're spending 300 million, I might have that wrong, converting some of their sites into residential.
Wow.
Which, I mean, if John Lewis were, a place, if they're doing it, that's a sign, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's not, yeah.
And you think about these companies that have these huge estates, essentially, they're estates across the UK, and they're in prime locations. They're seeing the trend of online shopping, they're seeing the trend of all these factors. And they're noticing they've got this real estate assets that could be converted into hundreds of units. And I think that goes back to your point about the high streets. I think high streets they have been dying for tens of years. But there's serious opportunity, and it's starting to become, with Boris making these changes, that you can make change of use from things from gyms and doctors' practices. It's becoming a lot more common. Shops. So essentially, they're trying to reactivate the high streets, but into a different kind of high street.
Yeah.
And maybe condensing them in areas. So you'll probably find that high streets become a bit smaller in some areas. So you'll still have the shops, the retail, but it'll give opportunities for more like offices and resi on the ground floor, which I think is super important. And I think there's a great opportunity there.
And what about things like blocks of flats or old care homes or old office blocks maybe, which I guess are more expensive than the old chip shop.
Yeah.
Do you see opportunities there to convert into resi or even back into a care home or something? Like, are there weird opportunities around?
Yeah. So another example is if a building has been if it's been vacant for 6 months, if you can prove that it's been vacant as a unit, then you can. If it's a detached property, you're actually able to. I think it's between 6 to 12 months. You're able to knock it down and rebuild, so build something new there. So they're starting to try and change things that have been vacant for a long time. I've looked at stuff in Kent and in London. I did quite a lot of analysis on a care home. I've also done a care home before, and they are brilliant assets. They always have been to convert into flats because they're already sort of self-contained units. So things like care homes, absolutely. I think hotels as well. I think there'll be opportunities with hotels. I think they'll be converted more into flats.
Or like multiple Airbnbs, multiple SAs in Penang.
Because the Airbnb, the SA world has completely boomed. I think it will continue to boom. I think hotels, especially struggling hotels, I'm not talking about the big hotel chains, but you do get the B&Bs, you get the hotels. You can't imagine that they're going to be used as often because people prefer to have a flat that they can rent out for themselves. Yeah. So I think there's going to be loads of opportunities in terms of converting to resi, and I think it's already starting to happen, but I think there'll be a big sort of boom.
And when it comes to the actual build/refurb of a commercial to resi, what are the maybe key differences between that and just doing a standard resi refurb? Is there a lot more structural work? Is it a lot more like, what are the big differences?
Yeah, I'd say generally the works are twofold. You have a lot more structural work. You have to put in a lot. You really need to get the contractors on board because there are potentially a lot more unknowns in a commercial property. Yeah. Generally, buildings that I've worked on, they can be listed or locally listed, or they can have some sort of community value. So you have to be quite careful with sort of changing the facade. But generally, I'd say it's really when it comes to contractors. I think we'll talk about contractors, but essentially you've got to, with your smaller residential developments, you've got to really sort of manage them on a very close basis. But with the big commercial contractors, you need someone that really knows what they're doing, that's comfortable in doing these developments. Because the costs are generally significantly more, just naturally, because there's more floor space, there's more risks, there's more unknowns, more contingencies. But in that side, I would say that I've had more headaches off one residential house because the builder was cheap, or
they're not professionals. They're not professionals.
Compared with a larger freehold block that I've converted with someone who's absolutely professional, who said, I speak to them daily, but they know exactly what they're doing.
They're contractors,
they maybe do design and build, so they build from the drawings and they take responsibility for, they take responsibility for how they're building. Because
that's the key thing.
Because and that's really important when you come to these sort of builds. They need to be conscientious because you can get. I've had projects where I'm sure you've had exactly the same, where they're not that way inclined. They try to cut corners. And that is actually a much bigger headache than it can be on a big project. Even though the numbers are double, it doesn't matter. It's more stressful. It's more time management.
It really is. And that leads us nicely to one of our next videos. We're going to talk about contractors, builders, refurbs, and the headaches and the good times, small good times, that we've both had.